Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Chill Like a Mother podcast. We are here today talking with Kelsey, someone who I spent a lot of time with in the middle of the pandemic, training for our second level certificate of expressive arts therapy. She also is a mom, and today we are going to be talking about all of the day-to-day ways and why we were drawn to expressive arts therapy and why it has created, I call it magic, but I'm going to invite Kelsey to say whatever she needs to say about expressive arts therapy, but kind of like breaking down some of the stigma and the ways that we can use it in our daily lives for whatever intention you might have. So Kelsey, can you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and let's like jump right in. Tell me like what is your favorite art medium?
Ooh, good question. I love working with kind of collage pieces. So I always go to collage, whether I'm creating something myself or working with students or clients or groups of people, working with my kids. I just find it very accessible and therapeutic, that searching, finding, pulling apart images, working with kind of mixed media. I also love the fiber arts are kind of coming up a close second. Yeah, so I would say those are my two favorite art mediums currently, but always changing.
Awesome. I also love collage. I am drawn to it. I think if I was like stranded on an island, I would need like a collage kit, or I would make one
Yeah.
like from the island's materials. It would just be
Yeah.
like that would be my go-to for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. There's
Yeah.
lots to be said even just through that medium, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you do it? Because I think everyone's creative practice can look differently. And so tell me all about like your creative practice and why you use it and what feelings tend to um, draw you in, to wanting to express it.
For sure. I feel like regardless of the capacity I'm working in, as I mentioned briefly, so I am a mother, but I am also a teacher. I work with students. I have two children of my own. I am currently working with adults in the work I'm doing, which I'm sure I will touch on more later. But regardless of the demographic or the clientele I'm working with, collage and that form of art in particular is so accessible to everyone. It really draws upon um, whoever I'm working with, our inner resources and just the kind of inspiration that each of us has, which may be different from one person to another. So I love using that as an art form, almost as a guide to allow my students or clients or children to decide and have choice in what materials they want to bring into that work, or what do they find meaningful that they may want to explore with, rather than designate certain materials right from the get-go. So I just love the choice it provides, and I love how if you are working in any kind of group setting, each outcome is vastly different. So you would never have two finished pieces that look the same or even have the same theme or same meaning. They're very unique to whoever the creator was.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you find the collage process gives you when you're doing it for you?
Yeah, so a lot of the work I do is centered around themes of grief and loss, and that comes from experiences in my own life. Um, I furthermore now in my training as an art therapist and currently doing a master's in art therapy, I'm recognizing that I have an existentialist theoretical approach. So I really love that the whole idea behind collage, and as I mentioned, the ripping and tearing of paper to create something new, is almost that building hope or building something new out of what once was. So in an existential eye, I see that as taking a situation, whether it's positive or negative, and doing something with that energy, creating something with that. And I know I'll quote Sean McNiff, who's an amazing expressive arts therapist and kind of the grandfather of the field, says that art heals by taking the pain and doing something with it. I think I butchered that a little bit, but yeah, I feel like that almost is a metaphor for collage work and mixed media. It's almost that healing journey, whether personally or in a group, and the process itself of that searching, finding, ripping, tearing, cutting, all of that process in creating a product in the end. Yeah, something magical, as you said, Kayla, happens
Oh,
throughout that whole.
happens. It
Mm-hmm.
does. Something magical happens. And um, I actually have this really fond memory of when we were doing the level 2 training and we all had to lead in an exercise. And I remember the one that you did, and I actually can't even remember what the prompt was, but I remember towards the end of the session that you were teaching, you had asked us, I think, that if the art that we made was to be like an album cover, what the album would be called, and then what the tracks would be called. And I was actually going through. I have like I call it my expressive arts, like Bible. It's like all of my level 1, all of my level 2, any kind of learning that I've done in the expressive arts is all in this one art journal. And I was flipping through it the other day for some inspiration for social media. And I stumbled across my, like, I don't have the art still. It must have been maybe like an installation or something that we'd done. I don't remember it being something physical or like visual art, I mean. And all I have is like the album cover name and then like 12 tracks. And it immediately took me back to that moment. And I could actually feel like how I felt in that moment and the magic and the meaning, and also like a lot of the like hurt and stress that I was going through at that time. I was like immediately transported there, and I could feel this like connection to you through that experience. And I have written down things from other therapy experiences or other workshops, or, those, the psychoeducational kind. I have written them down. And when I go back in my notes, I don't have that feeling. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have that same connectivity to the content as I do when I have been on the receiving end or I have walked someone through something.
Wow, thanks for reminding me of that too, Kayla. I totally forgot about ever kind of suggesting that. And now I penciled it again for me. I was like, oh yeah, look at this amazing idea I had once. Because I haven't done it with a group since then or since suggesting it. But it actually reminded me of a recent project I did for one of my courses. We were asked to kind of create a life map, and we could bring in visual art if we wanted to. So it was a bit of a paper, but you could be creative with it. And of course, being the person that I am and wanting to use creativity in my life however I can, I decided that I would do a little bit of writing, but also create a visual. And what I thought of right away was music. I'm very much a lover of music, which is probably why I had that idea. And even thinking about collage and piecing things together, I kind of visualize sound as well and bringing in some of those other arts as the expressive arts does. So this project, I created a soundtrack for my life. So it was a life map, and it's supposed to mark kind of transitional or critical periods throughout your life But I tied that to music, and I thought, okay, which songs that are already existing, which songs would I attribute to the different kind of critical moments of my life? And then my visual art piece was actually, I took a record, like a vinyl, and I created a visual symbol or image that went along with each song, depending on what I chose.
Wow.
And it kind of goes in a spiral and then concludes in the middle is like the final image. And that alone, I know I had to do it as a school project, but I was like, this is something I would recommend everyone do. Perhaps not to the extent that I did, but even just thinking about, like, if you were to designate one song for as the opening song of your life, like if you were to think of, yeah, like what would be your opening song? And I think mine was Walk of Life by the Dire Straits. Just because it kind of has that symbolism in the lyrics and the walk of life, like I'm alive now, but also it takes me back to kind of my childhood and hearing my dad really like the Dire Straits, so it brings me back to that era and hearing that being played perhaps around the house and or at weddings, going to weddings as a child. Yeah, so that was the song that marked the beginning of my life. But yeah, that was a therapeutic experience in its own, and not really knowing the power that would have within the process. Yeah.
I'm curious how, or if at all, your creative practice helps you, supports you, guides you in motherhood.
I think it does for sure. I know it does, actually. Not I think it does. The tricky part, as anyone who's listening who is a mother knows, is finding the time and space for that. So I've had to be very mindful of finding ways to include it in my daily life and with my kids and try to model that with them. So that could include kind of art making around the table or drawing. An example that I kind of think of at the same time when I was doing my training with you, I remember we had a cat at the time, like a family pet, and she suddenly became sick and ended up passing away right around that time. And she had to be put down at the vet. And my kids would have been fairly young. My son, who's 8 now, probably would have been, I don't know, how many years ago was that?
I think that was 3. Is it
Yeah.
3 years ago
Yeah, I
now?
was going to say
Yeah.
like 5-ish. And so my daughter would have been like 2.5 or something like that. But it was, again, kind of that teaching moment with my kids and trying to teach them about grief and how this cat family member that we had was no longer with us, which my 5-year-old could kind of grasp, but the 2.5-year-old, it was, that idea that there's something here, like physically, and now like this cat is not coming back. So my 5-year-old on his own found a photograph of our cat and took a marker and just like he was trying to explain to his little sister that our cat was no longer with us, so he like drew a circle and then like a line through it, and then went to her and said, "Kitty, bye bye." Like, Kitty not here. And so I found that interesting, that he kind of turned to a visual to help explain that experience. And then together we kind of talked about what had happened, and we ended up creating, again, a collage that was a tribute piece to the cat and the kitty, and it included her photograph, and then I kind of drew out the cat dish, like her food dish, and then we even put some actual cat food on it, like glued it on. So we made this family collage together. And it was almost like a morning ritual of like, now we have this piece that it can symbolize what has happened, but also the process of making it together was kind of that morning experience that we were able to have together as a family. So of course
Mm.
I don't do those things every day, but it's kind of like thinking about how can you pull upon kind of the creative sources that we have access to help in times of stress or challenge or um, yeah, like I know coloring or drawing can be really calming at any time. So if my kids are feeling a bit anxious or stressed, I'll often suggest that we just kind of gather around the table and color or draw together. And if they're a bit resistant to do that, then I might model that by saying like, "Oh, mom's had a really tough day. Like I'm going to just sit here and do some coloring or drawing or even sitting on the couch and trying to sketch in a notepad." And then they're curious what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And trying to model that so that they kind of take their attention away from if they're watching something or playing video games or, you know, um, yeah, so just those little moments, often in nature too, like outside, just noticing what's around, collecting materials. I love giving kind of inanimate objects characteristics. So talking about, if we find a rock or a pine cone, like, oh, what do you think this could look like? Or what could we paint it as, or
Mm.
starting to kind of bring those things more to life or notice them a bit more. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I do the same thing. I'll be like journaling or painting, or I'm often sitting at the kitchen table. It's like pretty normal for my kids to walk into any room and I'm doing something creative or wild or wacky. And and they'll just like, I cannot tell you how many notebooks I have of like art journals or actual written journals, even like my daily planner with like their scribbles, or they'll like leave me little notes on a page, or they'll like find a Pokemon sticker and like put it, in like one of my things. Or for a while, our kitchen table just was like consumed with the coloring pages. My kids were really into this Pokemon coloring book that we got them, and then my oldest wanted to like cut them out and put them in a folder. It was a whole process, and it's funny for those who've been longtime listeners. You've probably heard me say this, but for any of you who are new or finding me because of this particular conversation with Kelsey, um, 3 out of the 4 of us are neurodivergent. And so for me and my oldest in particular, like if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. And so it was funny because it just like consumed our table in one moment in a motherhood fury. I just put it all away. I was like, I cannot take this mess anymore. There's like literally hundreds of coloring pages taking up half of the table. And I put it away, and it's so funny. In 2 weeks, he hasn't touched it because it's away. And so it's like, for me, part of making creativity and expression part of our lives is that it's out and it's
Mm-hmm.
often messy, and there is like unfinished projects like here and there. My kids are still decorating these like sun catcher, like Easter things that I got them at the dollar store, just like layers and layers and layers of paint. They're still all over the table.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this is being recorded in April. We're not releasing it till September. There's some context there. But it's, it's this view in my family anyway, that expression is encouraged. It brings us into the present moment. We can find like meaning from it. I have been like asking my kids to show me what their feelings look like for like their whole lives. Like I think they're probably better at drawing them than they are explaining them, or like ripping stuff up. My son, he'll be mad and he'll be like, I just want to rip this up. I'll be like, well, it's like a piece of paper, like go for it. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
anger. That's a healthy expression of anger coming out of your body. Like follow that urge, right? And this is something that I teach my clients all the time, is to follow those urges. They'll have a piece of paper. We'll have like done the process, right? We'll like, I'll lead them through whatever creative process is calling to us that day. And they'll get to the end and I'll say something like, okay, so what's the urge now that you have with this? And some of them will be like, I want to rip it up. I don't want to look at it, or I want to put it on my fridge, or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, follow that urge. And be like, you want me to rip it up, but I just spent all this time like making it. I was like, yeah, but we're not putting this in a museum. Like, this is not, if you want to recreate it and do the artist thing, you go for it. But like in this moment, you want to rip it up. So let's rip it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just focusing on it is, as you said, like it's the process. And so I think making it more accessible, making it more like overt, that creativity lives in all of us in some way,
Mhm.
as long as we have kind of materials or a little bit of help kind of close by, I think we can find it a little easier. And I often think back to my childhood and how that creativity was kind of fostered through my parents, and specifically my dad, who was an artist. And as you mentioned, our kitchen table was always like, that is where creation happened in whatever form it looked like. School projects were done at that table. My dad would be working on different art pieces or contracts, or he worked at the museum, so sketching up kind of exhibits that were coming. And yeah, it was very seldom that that table was actually used for dining at. Even though it was the dining table, it was more the creating table. So I just, that was just our way of life. Like
Mhm.
it was our regular kind of scene in the house. So I'm trying and I'm hoping to model that for my own kids. And I think it's really challenging at this time in our world, and
Mhm.
the way that, we're gearing more towards technology and centering around perhaps other options that are not necessarily paper, pen, and
Mhm.
creating. I know creative things can be done with technology as well, but yeah, just making sure those materials, and they can be very simple. Like, you don't need to go out and get yourself a whole set of paints, but just have something that can be used kind of tactilely, if that's a word.
It is now.
It is now. Yeah, because that process also comes with the touching and feeling and ripping, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the the thing that I find the most hard to describe, and also the most profound part of any kind of creative expression, it doesn't have to be therapeutic. Some of the art expressions that I do or show my kids aren't therapeutic in nature. They're
Mhm.
just like an expression of self on a piece of paper or a cardboard box or whatever. um, the hardest thing to explain, I think, is what it gives you, right? Like,
Mhm.
I it's hard for people to understand or believe, except for the people who have experienced that profound experience from creativity. The thing that it gives me is like patience and presence and a container to hold the hard and the easy and the good and the bad and the stress and the joy of life. And if if I don't make time for it, because it is so central to my life and has been very central in my life since I was a child, when I'm not doing it, I know that I'm not okay. And and a story that comes to mind is one that Jennifer Buchanan shared on the podcast like this time last year, around how even as a music therapist, she couldn't identify that she wasn't okay, even though she hadn't turned the radio on in her car for 18 months. And then suddenly she turned the radio on and was like, she describes it as like waking up. It was
Mhm.
like, holy, like this resource that I have used for so many years in my life that I share so openly with other people, I didn't really even notice the absence of it because I wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you asked me that question earlier. I don't think I answered it, but what it gives me, I think, kind of this creative lifestyle, or working through the expressive arts, which could also just mean creating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think it does give me a cathartic release of whatever I'm needing at that time. And sometimes that is kind of that moment to stop and breathe a little bit, the moment of peace. But then other times, especially when you're working through challenges in your life, it gives me that opportunity to heal or to see my emotions in a visual way that I may have not been able to understand through language. And the science, there's much science behind that, but kind of the short version is that, especially when trauma is experienced in our brain, it happens in kind of the implicit or the midbrain, where we can't always give language to those experiences right
Mm-hmm.
away. But when we're asked to draw something that happened, we can kind of pull on that information a little more easier, and then hopefully kind of move it forward into that prefrontal cortex and start to give language to it, start to understand. So it's almost that being able to see an experience outwardly that maybe you didn't even know existed. So similar to Jennifer, there's times that I'm like, I'm doing pretty good, I'm doing okay, and then I'll create something, or or hear a song, or play music, and then I'll be a bit of a mess and be like, oh, wait a sec, I
There's
think
something
I think
here.
there was something there. But also joy, right? Happiness can be found in those moments too, and
Oh,
you're like, oh
yeah.
wow, like this actually feels really great. And I wouldn't have known that I felt this way about this certain experience if I didn't have this kind of creative compass to guide me in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, so much richness from this conversation. I'm already pulling like so much inspiration of like future expressive arts, things that I want to explore, the life map that you mentioned, and the like what would your opening song be, or what are the songs that you could choose for like pivotal or critical moments in your life. My like brain just went like, ooh, creative compass, what might that look like, what direction would I be going in, where would it
Mm-hmm.
guide me, like just like so much ideas and inspiration in that. So as a listener, I encourage you, like right now or at your next possible opportunity, to get out your journal or even like a post-it note, a pen. I have done like expressive arts in my car while my kids are at kickboxing, like on an envelope.
Mm-hmm.
um, like you can do this anywhere with anything, with the intention that you want to explore something about yourself or your experience, and you can do it with a topic in mind or not at all. And it's such we overcomplicate the process, humans, like just
Mm-hmm.
we overcomplicate the process. I have to have the right thing, I can't do it until I sit down, or I have 25 minutes and I won't be interrupted, and I have to have all my favorite stuff in front of me. When I think the best parts of expressive arts therapy is its spontaneity, is its not planned. It can be both. It can absolutely be highly planned. And it can also just be because you feel like it, or because you're at the beach and you also feel like making a sandcastle because your children are.
For sure. Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel inspired by this too, Kayla. And I'm like, oh, maybe I need to create something even after this conversation.
Tonight, I'm going to explore what this creative compass would
Yeah.
look like. I'm gonna explore that. Where would I be holding it? Like, where do I imagine myself
Yes.
holding it? Where is it guiding me? What's behind me? Like, yeah, there's all kinds of things in
Yes.
that.
Or I'm wondering if it is like uh, is it an inner compass? Or is it
Mm.
inside you, or perhaps it is like a physical object that you're holding? I don't know.
Mhm.
I feel like mine might be internal somewhere. But again, where in my body is that?
Yeah, where is it living?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much. And that's
Yeah.
what came out. I don't I was not planning to say that.
Oh, Kelsey, it's been so great to connect with you in this way. I so appreciate all of your wisdom and everything that you bring to the expressive arts community and through your art therapy degree and your work with students and adults. And the world is a better place. The people who you have touched with expressive arts therapy, they are different because of it.
Oh my goodness, that's very kind. Thank you so much, Kaylin, for the work that you're doing as well. It's an honor
Thank
to chat with
you.
you.
Thank you. We will see you again next week on the